From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Our next speaker is David Weinberger, and he's known to many of us here. He's a very influential writer and thinker in connection with the impact of technology on business, culture, education, politics, government, and, well, just about everything else. He's the author of several important books, including the Cluetrain Manifesto and Everything is Miscellaneous, The Power of the New Digital Disorder. His latest book is Too Big to Know, which focuses on how the internet is transforming knowledge and expertise. David is a senior researcher at Harvard Law's Berkman Center for the Internet and Society, and also co-director of the Harvard Library Innovation Lab at Harvard Law School. And David has many deeply intellectual and original insights into how internet technology is changing the way we think and learn. And we look forward to hearing more. Thank you, David.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me here. And that was, thank you, Bill, and thank you. That was such a, I loved your talk so much. So, we're switching out computers. I can't help but thinking, as Martha was describing the walking into a convenience store and having it turn out to be full of porn, that this was like the perfect metaphor for the internet. So I want to, I'm not going to be nearly as helpful as Anil was. I want to talk about what's going on with information within as broad a context as I can possibly think of. And so I'm going to talk about it in terms of knowledge. So information, when it was invented around 1948, hold on, let's see if this actually projects. Does that look like, okay then. It was invented at a time when it was very, very difficult to manage information. And information was literally invented to be managed in the computer age. And our machines were pretty paltry, and the only way to manage information was by beginning a very strict regime of limiting it, of having as little information as we possibly could, because it was just, we didn't have the technology to manage it. And so the systems of information that we built were based around this extreme limitation, where somebody would come up with the minimal set of categories that we need to track, the fields we need to track, and the minimal restricted type of information that's put in, and that's what we did, because information was, the system was designed to deal with the fact of the paltriness of the limitations of information. So this was very much in line with our basic strategy for dealing with knowledge itself in Western culture. And I'm only talking about the West, so let me be clear. But, which was, we've always known that there's a lot of more than we can manage, and so knowledge has been, our basic strategy has been to reduce at each level, going up this pyramid, which was invented in 1989. In each step, we get value by reducing. That's why it comes to a point at the end. And now, for the first time, we have a technology that allows us to invert this, that our technology is incredibly capacious. And so we are able to know without having to reduce in order to know. And this is an epochal change in information and in knowledge. So I want to take a very quick trip backwards to what information has been in our culture, and then look at some knowledge networks, the networking of knowledge. So I'm going to be absolutely as quick as I can. So I want to point to a few properties of knowledge in the West. One is that the first is that it's always been about filtering and reducing. So the very concept of knowledge invented by the Greeks arose because there are lots of people, let's be straightforward about this, lots of wealthy men who were allowed to speak, say whatever they wanted, but very few of those opinions were true, and even fewer of those were you justified in believing as true, which was Plato's definition of knowledge. And so knowledge was always a matter of winnowing, of going through and filtering out to get to the nuggets. Second characteristic of knowledge is that it's been that which we agree about. It's what's settled. If we're still arguing about something, we say, oh, we don't know. We don't know yet. We wait until, so knowledge drives out difference. Third characteristic is that we have assumed, and this actually is very interesting to me that this now sounds like a foreign concept. It sounds like a very old concept, but it's not. For 2,500 years, we'll say 2,400 years, we've assumed that to know something is to know its place in the order of the universe. That sounds like crazy medieval talk now, and it is medieval, but it's also up until just maybe a few generations ago, was absolutely taken for granted. To know what something is to know its single place in the order of the universe, and to deny that there is a single order to the universe marked you either as a lunatic who denied there was any possibility of knowledge, or a heretic who denied that there was a God who would set up the world in a rational and orderly way. And that's so the very definition of knowing something was to put it in its taxonomical place, the single taxonomical place. The fourth characteristic of knowledge has been that it's a series of stopping points. So when you find an expert, you ask her a question, you get the answer, and you can move on. And if you don't trust that answer, then we have a secondary series of stopping points, which is a credentialing system, which allows us to, oh, well, I didn't know you had a degree from Oxford, or I didn't know your book had been published by Oxford University Press, or whatever, and now you can have some confidence. And this system works. It's an amazingly efficient system at a terrible price, but it works incredibly well. It's why we are the dominant species on the planet. We can ask a question. We don't have to redo the research, redo the experiment in our backyard. We can build upon what we've known. It's a series of stopping points, and that's been the glory of the system, as well as a tremendous limitation. It cannot be an accident that these properties of knowledge are also properties of the medium of knowledge. It just cannot be that it's simply an accident. Or put this differently, McLuhan was right. The medium of knowledge has been paper, been writing things down, been books, and it's been libraries. Well, libraries of books and libraries are, of course, heavily filtered. They go through, as you know, they are, what gets written is settled. The ink settles into the paper, which is why publishing something is a big, important event. You cannot peel the ink out of the paper. When we organize our physical manifestations, the medium of knowledge, books or papers, everything has to go in one and only one place. And so we try to come up with the single best order, just as we have assumed that there is a single order of the universe, as if ideas are limited by the same factors that limit physical objects. It's a tragic error that has limited our pursuit of knowledge for 2,500 years. And finally, books are stopping points. That's where a lot of their utility comes from. But when you're writing a book, you have to put into it everything the reader needs, because you know the reader is not going to be able to or have the incentive to put the book down, get on the bus, go back to the library, find the book in the shelves if it's there, and read. It's too much of a stopping point. So you try to get everything the reader needs into the book. And that's how we've constructed knowledge, and the topology of knowledge has reflected that. It is not an accident. But now we have a new medium. Knowledge has a new medium. And it's my hypothesis that, that knowledge is taking, just as it took on its properties of the old medium, knowledge is now becoming networked. Knowledge lives in networks and is taking on the properties of networks. And when I say networks, what I mean is one particular network, the internet. So I want to look at some knowledge networks. These are not special thingies that have been, these are things that we are all familiar with, and that's why I've chosen them, in fact. This networking of knowledge, to a large degree, is already accomplished. It happened under our eyes. So First example is the faster-than-light neutrino issue. There's a really good book by Michael Nielsen called Reinventing Discovery. It doesn't talk about this, because about the neutrinos, that's too new, but about the networking of science. It's really wonderful. In any case, so what would have been the single most important set of data in science over the past 100 years was published at archive.org, a site that is absolutely non-peer-reviewed, no editorial process beforehand. Any scientist with any standing can just post whatever he or she wants there without any peer review. So the most important data, well, conceivably, now it turned out to be false because of that pesky optical cable that was not plugged in all the way, but it had the potential to overturn Einstein and all of physics, basically. And it was published at an open access site with zero peer review or editorial content. In fact, the peer review occurs afterwards. There's a bunch of social tools at archive.org. And to Anil's point, this is a site that's on the web. Anybody can link to it. It's there. And so because it was not in an application, it spawned a web. And that's why they did it. They put it up there because this was the fastest way of publishing, and because they wanted to make it public so other people could jump in and build a network of knowledge so that we could figure this out together. And this network of knowledge filled in very quickly with dozens and dozens of scientific papers and untold and uncountable, literally uncountable posts of various sorts of people with good ideas, bad ideas, brilliant ideas, stupid ideas, amateurs, professionals, high-end physicists, people who, without the math, if you had a question, you could get it answered. You know, when the 1919 experiment was done that proved that Einstein's theory was right, or the eclipse experiment, it actually made it onto the front page of the New York Times. It was a pretty rare thing for a science experiment. And if you got that issue that day and you read that article and you were excited about it and you wanted to know more, you couldn't. That's what you had. You had this rectangle on the front page of the Times, and you were happy you had that. That was unusual. Now, if you have a question, because it's a linked environment, because this knowledge is linked, you can find out whatever you want at whatever level of expertise. And if you can't, you can pose a question, and somebody will answer it very likely. This web of knowledge only has value because the pieces in it disagree, because they're different. If they were all saying the same thing, it would have no added value. In fact, it would have negative value. It only has value because of this disagreement, this difference and disagreement, which actually leads to the next point. With knowledge in the age of the internet, network knowledge is unsettled. So everybody loves this quote, I think, from Senator Moynihan, that everyone is entitled to his own opinion, not his own facts. And I think one of the reasons that we like this, and we hear this more and more, is that we want facts to play a particular role. We want to believe, this is the Enlightenment ideal, that even though we seem to disagree, if we sat down long enough, we could come together over the facts. Well, we now have empirical evidence that, much as we might like that idea, we now know it's not going to happen. You go out on the web, and the very first thing you'll notice once you get past the convenience store and the porn is we don't agree about anything. There is nothing that goes uncontested on the net. And I am not a relativist. I'm not even much of a postmodernist. I'm not saying, oh, whatever facts you want to believe, they're true. I don't believe that for an instant. It's not only a dangerous belief, it's literally a crazy belief. There are facts, but they're not going to do the job that we in Senator Moynihan want them to do. They are not going to bring us to agreement. We may want them to. We may mourn the fact that they're not going to, but they're not going to. And by the way, they never did. Now we can just see that they don't work the way that we wanted them to. Can't give up on them, but they're not going to do the job we wanted. And so we have arguments. We have many arguments. Some of the arguments are sort of, stupid. The flame effect, that goes out to you, Anil. In the 19th century, scientists spent a lot of time having arguments that now seem, and I think are, essentially as silly about what this thing is. Could it actually exist? It did not fit into any of the Linnaean categories. It was a mammal with eggs. It could not exist. It ruined the beauty of the order. And so we had we had decades of arguments, very serious arguments about this. And now we tend not to do that because we have come up with this, and this is the good news, I think, is we've come up with, increasingly with ways in which we can benefit from disagreement. Now, there are realms where this is not happening. You look at politics, and I think it's hard to have anything except a sinking feeling in your gut. But in some realms, we are actually benefiting from this type of disagreement. So at a site like Encyclopedia of Life, which is a wonderful site, every species gets its own page. You can look up the animal, the species, by whatever name you want. It doesn't care. It collects as many different names, including vernacular names, multiple language names, so that you can find the species that you want to know about. And likewise, if I think that, well, the platypus actually must be within this spot in this taxonomy, and you say, no, you're stupid. It's got to be in this taxonomy over here. We don't have to settle that unsettlable, unresolvable difference, because Encyclopedia of Life also has a server that stores multiple taxonomies. So I can see it within my preferred, and you can see it within your preferred taxonomy, and we don't have to have the stupid non-productive argument. Instead, we can recognize that we're talking about the same thing and actually have a productive, we can collaborate in our knowledge. This is the power of namespaces. And namespace is just one, but a particularly powerful way in which we are able to collaborate across differences while maintaining these differences. Maintaining these differences. Okay, so the next sort of knowledge network is among software developers who are now, so this is perhaps an overstated thesis, but I think it's actually defensible that software developers have created for themselves an environment that is the best rapid learning environment humans have ever had. So if you have a question, you want to learn a new programming language, you'll go on Google or whatever, and you'll get thousands and thousands of tutorials. If you have a question, you can go to a site like Stack Overflow, ask the question, somebody will answer it. Very likely, somebody will iterate on that answer. So, well, no, that's good, but it won't work in IE, in Internet Explorer, because nothing works in Internet Explorer. So here's how you get around that. And then somebody else will fix that. And small iterations. And you end up at the bottom of the page. Actually, it gets voted up, so top of the page. You have the actual code that you can copy and paste, and you're done. And you can learn from. And in fact, you can see the iterations and learn from those. This is a pretty spectacular environment for rapid learning. The chances of, this is what happens at scale. You know, we have this many people connected. The chances of you being the first person to have a question diminishes to zero rapidly. So whatever question you have, somebody has probably already asked, and somebody has probably already answered and iterated on. And as you're working on your code, if it's open source, you'll post it at a site like GitHub where other people can take advantage of it and make small tweaks, make it work for them, and contribute back into the ecosystem. And when you're done with your code, you may make it available as a library for visualizing data, for example, as D3 is an incredible library that you don't need to know much about programming to turn your data into spectacular visualizations. People contribute back into this set. So there are some lessons, I think, to learn from this developer's environment. The first is that, I know it's odd to say about developers, but it requires, and they are showing, a particular type of humility and generosity. The humility to acknowledge in public to your peers you don't know how to do something, and the generosity to spend your time helping somebody else. And sure, you get the ego satisfaction of being the one who answered the question, but what is it that humans do that doesn't have mixed motives? The second is that iteration is an incredible tool at scale. It is an amazing tool at scale. Things get really good. They get asymptotically close to perfection thanks to iteration. We can see this at Wikipedia, too, at its best. And the third thing, I think, to learn from this is the power of learning in public. We have an educational system that assumes that teaching is a private act, essentially a private act, that's intended to better the individual, so that we have a society that's filled with bettered individuals, and thus society gets better. And what we're seeing in the world of developers is instead an idea that the act of education itself, the act of learning, should itself be public, because there's social benefit in that. Why is it that one person should learn, which is a wonderful privilege, and not have that privilege shared when it can be at no expense, no and no cost. And on the web, we can, by learning in public. I'm very interested to see if this will have an effect on how our educational system works. Okay, next sort of network is Flickr, as already mentioned. Library of Congress, perhaps you've heard of this institution, has done, and you've heard of this project, the donation, the putting of a few thousand photos from World War II, these gorgeous color photos, I think was a spectacularly good act, both because it made these photos public so we can see them, and they're really beautiful photos, but also because it made a statement about the revered, and it is the revered institution of the Library of Congress, recognizing that scale, that we need scale to do the work of the Library of Congress. And so these photos are up, they're on Flickr, anybody can enjoy them, but of course users can also use the tools of Flickr, and they do immediately, they did immediately. So within a couple days in many cases, the 75 slots for tags at Flickr were filled up. And sometimes the tags that make perfect sense to a curator, somebody who's doing professional classification of some sort, in 1942, that's a good tag. You know, that's the date of the photo. Another is a little bit off, but somebody used the word quaff. It's a word that's not used all that much anymore, but if you're interested in that sort of hairstyle, this is actually a great tag. You click on it, you'll see a lot of quaffs. I've never said the word quaff so often. It's beginning to sound awfully odd to me. Somebody tagged this red, which I take actually as sort of aesthetic comment. I had not noticed that the red of her lips is mirrored just about perfectly in the red of the tip of the probe. So here's art criticism. Oh yeah, this is actually about red. I get that now. And somebody tagged it Rosie the Riveter. This is not Rosie the Riveter. So somebody, this is Rosie the Riveter. So somebody knowingly, I presume, falsely tagged this, applied a lie about this photo, a knowing falsehood, which of course is also an insanely good tag. If you're interested in the role of women in manufacturing in World War II, this tag is beautiful. You click on it, you'll see this great array of photos, none of which are in fact of Rosie the Riveter. So my point here is this is a mess. This is not how professionals would do it. This is, as somebody could tag this Aunt Ida because it looks like her Aunt Ida, possibly because it was her Aunt Ida. The comment sections to some of these photos contain personal stories about the people in the photos that are at times moving. In any case, you can apply whatever sort of tag you want here without constraint, without editing. The result is an entire mess. Some professional tags, some tags that are wrong and lies or idiosyncratic. And in a sense, it doesn't matter. This is the price we pay. Because messiness is how you scale meaning. If you want these objects to be rich, saturated with meaning, the meaning that affects people's lives as well as the meaning that allows us computationally to go through and to make sense of these, then you have to allow messiness. Because you can't, it won't scale otherwise. Messiness is how you scale meaning. The last networky thing I want to look at for knowledge has to do directly with the change in the nature of data. Because data was invented to be put into its little cubicles. Right? In a spreadsheet database, it's a row and column sort of life if you're a piece of data. And that's how it works, and it's you know, fantastic as far as it goes. But now we are in the world of linked data, of massive releases to the public of data in triples, which I'm not going to even talk about. Because the point that I want to make is that the thing that for me is most revolutionary about linked data is the notion that as we put out data in what we used to call silos, but now we call clouds, is that by replacing the English, in our case English, but whatever, this is exactly the point, whatever language you're speaking, by replacing the human readable language with URIs that point to some source, like for example, a public web source might be the Encyclopedia of Life, or it might be Wikipedia, or it might be a French version of the Encyclopedia of Life, or whatever. That by doing this, we allow a type of computational stitching together that otherwise the computers would have missed because they don't know offhand that a water mole is actually a vernacular name for the platypus. And so the computer cannot make the relationship among these clouds of data. But with linked data, which is a data commons, which we really haven't had the way that we have it now. And we're just at the beginning of this. But we are getting there very rapidly. Every release of new data makes this commons more valuable. And so we can do something with these commons that we couldn't do before. It's having an effect on the very structuring of how we think about how computer models work. Because in the old model, with limited amounts of data, we would try to take some complex realm, break it down into a simple series of rules, and pour in the data that we had, and then sort of turn the dial, turn the crank, and watch the pieces move and figure out what's going to happen. Great doesn't scale. Doesn't scale, especially when you're dealing not only with complex systems, but with complex systems that you want to integrate, like economic models with the weather, with immunology, with fashion, the more that you integrate, the greater your error rate. And so we get a different approach in data commons, and I really like John Wilbank's way of putting it. At that point, he was with Science Commons, which is the thing that we really need is not one giant machine with a big crank we can all turn. What we need is your nerds arguing with my nerds. What we need is a marketplace, a bazaar, which data commons enables us to do because it provides open access to all of the same sets of data. And so lots of models, lots of ideas can contend and can integrate in their contention. This is because ultimately it's disagreement that scales knowledge. If you insist that knowledge is only that about which everybody agrees, knowledge is going to be this big. If you want to scale knowledge, you have to enable, allow, encourage disagreement. And we are richer for it. It's those connections among disagreeing parts that makes knowledge now richer and more meaningful than ever before. So very quickly, I want to acknowledge the danger. Lots of dangers. One is that if you stay in your own bubble, we lose. You're not acknowledging the difference. But we all have the tendency to do that. And so we have to be ever vigilant to remind ourselves and our children that that the bubbles are always bubbles. There's no life outside of a bubble, so we must recognize that our assumptions, our ways of thinking about things, that we're thinking about them as hard as we can, but there are always other ways of thinking about it. And so we need to go up a meta level in our understanding so that we recognize that our beliefs are always, our knowledge is always going to be messy and unsettled. It's always going to be specific to a domain. The rules of evidence are going to be specific to a domain. And most of all, if it's not connected, then you've misunderstood it. Because this is the opportunity. The opportunity is that it's not that we have too much information. It's not information overload. It's that the world is really big, and for the first time in human history, we have a medium of knowledge that's able to scale up to embrace that bigness, that hugeness, that vastness of the universe and its complexity. And to want to slide back from that to a safe world of information, or to forget the constraints of our own knowledge so that we live inside our own bubble and exclude difference, that would be a tragic error. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.